Hello everyone, good morning. So this is Madhuri. So we are going to start the webinar in another 2 minutes. Hello everyone, good morning all and all. So we're going to start the webinar now. Okay, let me start with the intro of understanding what we are doing today. So data privacy is going to a concern for many of the organizations and protecting personal information has become crucial. It's not just following the rules, it's about the building trust with customers and stakeholders. Strong data protection help keep your organization and customers' information safe. Hi, I'm Madhuri, Marketing Executive at Terralogic. Today we'll be talking about security and privacy compliance under Digital Personal and Privacy Act DPDP Act. Now let me introduce our panelists. So our first panelist is Prankul, Director of Lightbeam.ai. With over 20 years of experience, is passionate about delivering tech solutions and driving the business growth in IT field, bringing a wealth of knowledge in sales and strategies across multiple countries. Welcome, Prankul. And our next panel is Amandeep, Strategic Alliance Lead at Lightbeam.ai. With over 10 years of experience, he specializes in data protection and enterprise cloud solutions and hybrid cloud services. And he has worked with key clients globally. Welcome, Amandeep. And our next panelist is Sandeep Vijayaraghavan. So, cybersecurity EVP at Terralogic. He is cybersecurity expert over 20 years of experience in cybersecurity, risk management, and data privacy, providing innovative solutions across different industries. So, welcome, Sandeep. I would like to hand over the webinar to Sandeep.
Thank you for the introduction. And welcome Prankul and Amandeep for joining me in this conversation.
Thanks, Alik. Happy to be here.
Same here. So we understand that Digital Personal and the Data Protection Act is in place now. And we do get a lot of queries from our customers as to how they could be compliant over a period of time. The data is spread across multiple stores. Now, it could be on the cloud, it could be on the environment of theirs, laptops, and so on. Apart from the standard data that they have to handle, it's also the privacy data which the customers have to handle at this point in time. We understand that processing this data, managing this data is a big concern for our customers. What do you think, Prankul, is our insights on the overall act itself, and how do our customers engage from a privacy point of view and be compliant from data security? Over to you, Prankul. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Sandeep. Thanks for having us here. Really pleased, and we would love to share what our insights as Lightbeam are. So let me first start with the regulatory framework. DPDP Act is already there. It's already been passed, and soon, within the next few weeks, it's going to be fully implemented. The rules are going to be fully defined and all that. And that really creates the right regulatory framework for handling this whole PII and data privacy issue that you've mentioned. So, obviously we have GDPR and all such regulations in the world. So India now is also going to be at par with global regulations in this regard. So as far as the DPDP Act is concerned, it's going to cover all digital and digitized personal data that's out there, be it personal data, be it health data, be it financial data. And it's going to apply to all organizations that are handling this personal data or processing the data on behalf of another organization, and includes both goods and services. So there's certain key aspects connected with this DPDP Act that are given. So just as a summary, it introduces the concepts of a data principle, which is you and me, who's an individual whose personal data these organizations have, and also data processors and data fiduciaries. So data fiduciaries are the organizations who have access to our personal data. And then it talks very explicitly about things like consent, how it should be given freely, right? And as large organizations, which include retail or financial or medical, they have lots of different obligations as far as the DPDP Act is concerned, including having a data protection officer and an auditor, and taking care of the privacy impact whenever they introduce any new processes. As data principal, that's where this act really comes into play. So as data principal, it also assigns certain rights to us. If I'm working with a bank, and they have access to a lot of data for me, which makes sense, be it my personal identifications, be it my financial details, or so on. But as a customer, if I don't want to work with them anymore, I have certain rights. Or if they have incorrect data for me, I can get in connect with them, ask them to correct it, erase it, and also, they have to take care of update data breaches if they happen in my regard. So, if a personal data breach does happen, these data fiduciaries or the people who hold my data, they are required to take certain steps. Of course, the first step is to protect my personal data. And if a data breach does happen, they need to notify me as an individual, and also notify the regulatory bodies like the Data Protection Board. And that all should be done within specified timelines. Now, another thing that this DPDP Act introduces on behalf of the organizations is that if it's found that the data fiduciaries are not acting in the right way, it introduces a very large penalties, right? Even going up to 200 and 250 CR. Now, the fact that you mentioned, right, that there is a sprawl of data, it's just everywhere, and also this act coming, what it does is it makes compliance in a manual way extremely challenging. And there's a real need for some good technological solutions to be able to comply with this DPDP Act, and also in turn help transform the businesses themselves and how they take care of data security and data privacy in general. So that's where Lightbeam comes in. So Lightbeam is a platform, right? It brings in data security, data privacy, data governance under one single umbrella. What we have is we have AIML models in place, which enables automated privacy-aware data security. The first aspect that it does is that allows for 360-degree visibility of sensitive information, and that includes all the different kinds of data sources, be it on the cloud, be it on-prem, be it SaaS, or be it structured data, but also unstructured and semi-structured data. So think of wherever your data is available, be it in the databases, SQL or data lakes like Snowflake. But because of the use of communication technologies, we could have sensitive data in things like Teams or Outlook, or in like service applications like CRM or ServiceNow. Wherever it is, Lightbeam is able to connect to those data sources and find this sensitive data so that we have a full viewpoint. And once we have that, the remediation operations become extremely straightforward. Things like archiving this data, redacting this data, or deleting even, right?
So, Prankul, I actually had a quick point on this. So,
sure.
How do you think? So, when we look at Lightbeam, right? Lightbeam is really a unified solution in some sense, right? We talked about security, as you just mentioned, right? But how do you see privacy playing a big role? Because privacy is the most important as far as DPDP is concerned, and we understand that without security, privacy does not have a play. It's definitely an enabler. Right. So how do you see the security part essentially fitting into the privacy, and how these privacy workflows are going to help with Lightbeam?
Sure. That's a great point, Amandeep, that you made. So basically, what Lightbeam does is, since we now have a 360-degree viewpoint of the entire data ecosystem, PII, PHI, or PCI, we can seamlessly have privacy workflows on top of it. And Lightbeam includes those privacy workflows such as DSR, right? So it allows us to handle those data principal rights that I mentioned earlier, so that it empowers the organization to manage them in single clicks. As low as 60 minutes, we are able to respond to a data subject request. We have also workflows to carry out privacy impact assessments. So they are also seamlessly baked in. So anytime you have a new process that is getting onboarded, we can automate these privacy impact assessments. Another very crucial aspect is consent management, right? So DPDP really talks about consent, that how it should be freely given, how it should be managed, and if somebody revokes consent, then definitely we can't handle their private data. So the consent management piece is also automated enable. Lightbeam connects to all the different data sources where customer consents are captured and ensures consistency and adherence to all the different policies and regulations that are in
You
place.
did mention about the data consent part of it.
Correct.
So we understand the data fiduciary's roles and responsibilities, right? And you, along with us, are in the path forward to set this up for customers, right? But let's look at the data subject, right? How do we explain what their rights are? And if there is a consent management processes in place, which is the privacy ops, what we call today, how should a subject reach out to the data fiduciary to ensure the safety of their data? And in case they want to withdraw it, what are the steps that the user has to consider?
So those yeah, that's a great question. Those steps have to be clearly specified. The data fiduciary has responsibilities to have that information available openly on their website or on any communication that they have with their customers. That how, in case of any challenges or in case if a data breach is detected, how do the customers reach out? And also the data fiduciary themselves have a responsibility under the Act to proactively contact these folks in case a data breach does happen. And also,
and some of this is actually going to be covered in the demo if you see today, right? So your question on data principal rights as well as how consent management actually flows, where users can look at their consent as well as withdraw consent for some of the communications that are not relevant to them. That is something we'll definitely go through today. So,
our customers are definitely looking forward to that.
Absolutely.
Demo, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Certainly.
So just to kind of put it all together, like, so the key aspects with what Lightbeam does then is at the bottom of it is data discovery and classification, right? So the fact that we are able to figure out where sensitive data is, whose sensitive data we have, and what sensitive data, where, and who. So these are the three aspects, right? So Lightbeam, the solution connects to all of your different data. So you see few examples in the image on the left, but it's, we have more than 50 data sources, and if there is a newer data source, we can quickly get that onboarded using API level connects. And the other thing, we have also a zero trust architecture so that no data ever flows out of the customer's ecosystem. Right. And once we have that connection established, we can get this 360-degree viewpoint using our AI/ML models. So whose data, what data, and where is it? And the way we do it is basically that, let's say we have a 9-digit number, right? So that is the content piece. So we don't know what this data is. It could be, if you are in the US, for instance, it could be a social security number, or it could be a medical record number, right? Same way, if you have a 16-digit number, it could be a credit card number, but it could also be something else, right? Or a 12-digit number doesn't necessarily have to be Aadhaar, right? It can be other things. So just looking at some kind of pattern matching is not the solution. Lightbeam brings in an AI/ML approach to really figure out what this information is. So in this specific instance, it looks at the content, of course, which is a 9-digit number, but then it also looks at the context around it, right? So there is some conversation, the surroundings of this data. In this case, it's a part of a communication that has happened on, let's say, a Teams or a Slack, where somebody is asking for person David's medical record number. So clearly the 9-digit number in this case is an MRN and not a social security number. And then it also looks at the different connections, right? So there could be instances where a customer's information is partially available on some specific data sources, like, let's say we have a name and Aadhaar in some data source, and maybe an Aadhaar and a bank information on other data sources. It's also able to connect all of those and establish a full picture across the board of what all sensitive data is available. And that includes not only personal data, but also professional and proprietary data, right? So having said that, Amandeep, so what we see today, the biggest challenge, as we have been talking about, is that there is a lot of data sprawl. And this whole data discovery piece the accuracy is a real challenge. How does Lightbeam tackle this issue? Maybe this is now we are at a point where you can actually just go a little bit deeper and show and talk about what does Lightbeam do here.
Certainly, Prankul. Thanks for setting that context. So I'll move into the third aspect of it, which is actually showing a demo of Lightbeam and walking you through some of the topics that we've discussed and how Lightbeam is a unified solution. We'll try to focus on the most important aspects which are relevant from a DPDPA perspective. But to answer your question, let me jump straight into the demo. So let's actually take an example, right, of an e-commerce business that may be collecting a lot of data, and that data could belong to either end users, could belong to vendors, could belong to their employees, right? And some of this information is actually going to look like your name, your address, email address, credit card information, which is payment details for payment processing. Vendor information obviously will include things like vendor contracts, a ton of data that essentially is relevant to an end user. An end user can incorporate all of this. So how is Lightbeam looking at all of this data, right? Now, firstly, all of this data is obviously captured across multiple tools. Like Prankul mentioned, Lightbeam can connect to structured data sources, which would typically be your source of truths for where customer data is essentially present or end user data is essentially present. You could have unstructured applications like file repositories where you could have credit card information sitting in there. You could have Aadhaar card, PAN card data for KYC and all of that, right? So there is a lot of applications that whether it's a small business or a large business, could actually be using as part of their landscape to collect this data, right? So I'm going to walk you through the workflow of what is going to happen, how an organization or an e-commerce business is going to look at Lightbeam as a tool and being able to discover some of this data. So what you see on the screen is, if you focus on the top left side, there are 18 data sources that are connected. That's the first thing that you would do. If I go to the data sources section, right, you will see, actually, let me just quickly log in. So if I go to the data sources section, you can see a bunch of applications that are connected, right? From SharePoint to Google Drive to HubSpot, which is your CRM tools. You could have Salesforce. You could have ticketing systems like Zendesk, data lakes like Snowflake, a bunch of applications that you can connect to out of the box, right? So if I go back to the dashboard, Lightbeam is scanning for all of these different applications that have been connected and trying to understand what sensitive information have we discovered. So if we move on to the second pane of the dashboard screen, you can see 1.3 million attributes across these 18 data sources that have been connected have been discovered. If I click on this, it starts to get to the view of where I see the actual attributes that have been discovered. Right now, as I mentioned, for an e-commerce business, it would look like name, address, Aadhaar card, PAN card, credit card information, right? So you start to see all of these different attributes that have been discovered across your data landscape, where Lightbeam is automatically discovering sensitive information. Let's take one of the examples. If I see credit card, I can see 206,000 attribute instances of credit card data that's been discovered across different applications. If I start to deep dive into this, I'll see a list of data sources where credit card data is found. If I go to the data sources section, I see that SharePoint actually has a lot of credit card information, which for any business, let's say, is quite typical, right, for data collection and processing. But if I look at the screen and I can see that credit card data is also found within S3. Why is there credit card data found within S3 where it shouldn't be present? So let's start to look at such data, right? If I go into,
I have a very quick question.
Yeah.
That you are showing the credit card information which has been picked up by Lightbeam. How do we collaborate with a data protection solution like that of a DLP
Certainly.
and ensure that the data is protected as well? I'm talking of the data anonymization also, as well as the data which can get exfiltrated also.
Absolutely.
So if you pick up these labels, I hope that Lightbeam can also pass on a policy to the DLP.
Certainly.
To enforce a protection to any kind of data theft that could occur. Is
Right.
that something which is possible?
Absolutely. So that's actually a great question, and one of the use cases that we do very closely and work with DLP solutions out there. So just going back to the list of files that you actually see here, right? What will happen in a DLP case is Lightbeam will act as the data intelligence platform where it does all of the data discovery and classification for you. It's discovered all of these different elements like credit cards, so on and so forth within a certain file.
Sure.
And Lightbeam, based on the definition of how you'd like to label documents, a document that contains company sensitive information could be labeled as confidential. Now, that is the data intelligence platform. Now, this label is going to get picked up by a DLP solution like a Microsoft Purview, for example, and that is going to act as your policy engine, where Purview is going to look at that data, see that there is a confidential label on it, and anytime you try to attach that particular file, let's say in an email, and send it out to a vendor, for example, the DLP is going to prevent that file from going out. So we work very closely with DLP solutions where we act as the data intelligence platform doing the data discovery and classification, and the policy engine is your DLP solution.
So I would like to ask another question around it. When you're labeling these data, would you be only labeling the privacy data, or it could be any sensitive data as well? So that when the configurations are made to your DLP can also block the non-privacy or non-PIA data.
Certainly. So you have control over how you define something to be confidential, right? Yes. So all of that is a config that the user controls. So if there is a document and they want the document to be classified as sensitive based on certain attributes or file classification, you define that and it will only classify based on that. So the user has full control over how labels get applied. And based on those label definitions, you would then have DLP solutions act on it.
Right? One is the data discovery itself, which I do now understand for Procter & Gamble. That is one of the functionality of the solution. And the second is the classification, or in simple terms, the labeling of the data.
Correct.
So these two aspects are covered with Lightbeam solution.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then on top of that comes a whole privacy workflows, right?
Which so because privacy ops as well.
Absolutely. Exactly. So we'll actually get to that part. I know some of the users may be looking at, they want to see how does Lightbeam discover all the data.
Yes, this is becoming exciting, right?
Absolutely.
There's a lot of questions.
Definitely, that is the basis, right? If you don't know about the data, then you don't have anything, right? The whole privacy workflows then are shooting a bit in the dark, right? So if somebody were to send a data subject request under the data principal rights that we have with the DPDP or any other regulation for that matter, like in GDPR or in the US or in Canada, if you don't know what data is out there, it becomes a very convoluted exercise, right? To figure out, and because the data could be in multiple areas, some could be with finance teams, some could be with legal teams, and here with Lightbeam, it could be anywhere, and you already know it. So that's why the whole privacy regulation compliance becomes extremely straightforward with just single click or a few click workflows, and within a very short period, you have the report. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. So, Aman, we'd like to see how.
Yeah, absolutely. So, right now I was just talking about the data discovery piece. Let's look at examples of how Lightbeam is going to see credit card data, right? So, you have all of these different files detected in S3, as I said. Let's take a few examples. So, if you look at this PDF document, right? This is probably the most simplest thing to do for Lightbeam, right? So, you've got plain text sitting in a PDF. Lightbeam is trying to determine that there is sensitive information that includes credit card data as well. Let's go into a couple of more examples. This is definitely a hard thing to do. Not all solutions can look at screenshot data. So this is a screenshot that's essentially being captured from a database. Lightbeam is able to accurately determine what is credit card data and what is not credit card data, right? So it applies a bunch of ML techniques like OCR and so on and so forth to try to determine what sensitive information is present in screenshots. Another example, driving license. So one of the things I'd like to mention, right, I know we are talking about the DPDP Act. Lightbeam also complies or helps in compliance with other regulations as well globally, which includes GDPR, CCPA, Quebec Law 25. So you can see that a lot of these attributes are global in nature. Let's take another example of the India attributes, right? So this is an example of an Aadhaar card, how Lightbeam is able to accurately identify. You also mentioned about read action. Lightbeam is able to do that for you as well to essentially protect data. So if there is Aadhaar card number which you absolutely want to be redacted to ensure data protection, Lightbeam can actually come in and start to redact all of that data. Another example, PAN card. I know these are very popular sensitive documents as far as our regulation is concerned. So this is how, these are examples of how Lightbeam can accurately determine what a name, what a PAN card number, what an Aadhaar card number would look like. There are lots of other functionalities that I want to, that we may not be able to cover as far as data discovery and classification is concerned. But that's about it for the the demo today from
I
a
would have
data
a
discovery and
question more,
classification
maybe if you
perspective.
could just address it. Right?
Sure.
The consent management.
Yeah.
Right? How exactly your workflow works in consent management point of view?
Certainly.
Right?
Certainly.
Could you just explain us?
Perfect. Yeah, great question. I was actually going to come to that part next. So before I jump right into consent management, right, there is one very important piece because that actually relates to consent. One thing that Lightbeam uniquely does, and Prankul alluded to it as well, right, is that we are a solution that uniquely identifies who does the data belong to. So I've discovered all of these different sensitive attributes. That's great. But how can I differentiate between who is a customer, who is a vendor, who is an employee, and also tell you this employee's, or sorry, this customer's data, this is what we are collecting. So Lightbeam actually gives, and that helps in things like consent management and privacy workflows, which we'll talk about. So if you see this view, right, this is a 360-degree view of all of the different entities that Lightbeam is able to capture and tell you whose sensitive data this belongs to. So let's take the example of John Johnson. John Johnson is, let's say, a customer, and I can tell you what all sensitive data belongs to John Johnson and what all we've captured, right? So we've captured social security number, birth date, email address, and that data is sitting within Postgres, SharePoint, Outlook, so on and so forth, right? I can do tons of other things as well, but if I go right to the right part of the tab, you can see that there is a section for consent logs as well, where you will see all of the consents for that particular customer or end user essentially getting logged in there. So identity resolution is something that Lightbeam does uniquely. Let's go on to the consent management piece now. So if I go into privacy ops, there is a dedicated section that we have for consent and managing consent for the end user in some sense, right? So again, I won't cover every single bit of it, but just the most important pieces. So if I go into settings, this is where all of my applications for consent is going to get added, right? So consent is typically associated with marketing tools, CRM tools like HubSpot, Salesforce, so on and so forth, iTribble. These are all the tools that you would connect to, right? So, and then you would have different ways in which you would capture consent for the user. So we are able to integrate with these applications. Let's take the example of HubSpot. I can pull all of the predefined subscriptions that are there within that particular application and how you are communicating with an end user, right? And then be able to build out a preference center. Again, I'm not getting into the nitty-gritties of it. You can do an end-to-end consent management with Lightbeam, but this is what the end result of a consent would look like. So I've got product updates, marketing communications, third-party offers, personalized content. So let's take the example of an e-commerce business, right? Because that seems to be the most popular. Not that other use cases are not relevant. Every single organization who's collecting personal data is relevant, right? But in an e-commerce business, typically the end user would subscribe to, let's say, offers going on. You've got the big billion day sale and so many things going on at this point in time, right? So this is all consent that should be captured, that will be captured once the DPDP is out for the end user, right? And this is what their interface is going to look like. So if somebody does not want to have any communication sent to them, let's say for marketing related stuff or promotions or so on and so forth, right? The user has the ability to actually go there. Let's say they disable any marketing related communication, so they can just disable it in here. And then what will happen is Lightbeam actually goes back to the tool. So goes back to the marketing tool and actually disables that particular subscription in some sense. And then the user stops to receive that. So it gives that right for somebody to look at it from a solution perspective, where you have a consent manager who can, as an individual role, if the organization would like to, right? Or the end user who's actually coming in and either giving consent or revoking consent.
Thank you for this question. I would like to ask the question to Prankul. How do we engage with our customers? Now, the customers would initially start off just trying to know where the data resides. So is there an option for us to start off the initial assessment on the data side alone with the customer? before they start implementing the other processes on the data privacy side?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a variety of ways of engagement, including some Snap programs and also others where we can simply set up a data scanning part where they can discover and classify their sensitive data that's available across multiple data sources.
Right.
So there's just Sandeep, just one very important thing that I'd like to cover, which is data principal rights. I know Prankul also mentioned that. I was actually very excited to show that because that seems to be like the buzzword as far as DPDP is concerned, right? So I'll probably take 2 minutes to show that. And by the way, just if you have any questions on that, feel free to ask me. So if you look at this form, right, and this is integrated again end to end within Lightbeam, you can design this form. You can completely based on what your organization and collection would essentially look like. So this form would be embedded in a user's in a customer's website, and they would have this form given access to their end user, right? And they would come in and then say, I want to understand what data do you have about me? Very typical of any regulation, right? Which any privacy regulations or laws. So you can see that there are a bunch of requests that a data principal can raise, whether it is data access, rectifying or modifying that data. Let's say that somebody is incorrectly storing their mobile number and you want that to be corrected, and that's a very common use case. Or data erasure. I want you to delete all of my data. Another consent could be basically based on, which is again part of our DSR, is don't share any marketing related communication with a third party. So these are the kind of workflows that we have in the system. Let's take the example of a data access request, where a data principal would fill this out. This would land within the data subject requests within Lightbeam, and you can see a bunch of requests. Now, you have the ability to define who receives this request. We've seen in organizations, mostly this is given to the DPO, who will receive all of these different data requests essentially coming in. So if I click on one of the requests that have come in, right, from a data principal for a data access, as an example. Again, taking the example of John Johnson, remember we know all the data that essentially belongs to John Johnson from our identity discovery. So it goes through a certain verification. Now, the most interesting part is if I move on to the data discovery, Lightbeam already knows what data belongs to John Johnson. So if I look at all the different applications, I can see that there are 80 attribute instances that are contained within Postgres. There are 13 attribute instances contained within SharePoint. Similarly, in Outlook, G Drive, so on and so forth. So I already have a data attribute map of the user, of the data principal, that is essentially coming in and submitting this request. And then the last step, obviously, for that would be a report. The report gets generated and then sent out to the user. So I know Prankul said 60 minutes, but we can actually do that in a few minutes and cater to a data principal request.
I do understand. I have a question on this.
Yeah.
A data subject would like to also understand how the fiduciary has access or transferred the data or processed the data of that vendor. And how has the fiduciary eventually managed that data which is sent across after the consent is made? Is that an example that you also cover as a use case?
Yeah, absolutely. So see, when the consent is essentially received, right, that consent, so this is owned by the data fiduciary. So if you look at this application, right, Lightbeam, when the consent is submitted, it is usually received. Again, there can be different roles within the organization, whether it is a consent manager role individually within the organization or anybody within the organization. But it is received by the data fiduciary to start to manage that consent. But again, all of this is received as consent logging. All of this is automated back to the tool to essentially ensure that only what the user subscribed to is something that goes out to the end user, right? So there is not a lot of management. Also, I think it is just overseeing the application, ensuring that the consent flow is happening appropriately. So yes, those workflows are absolutely there, but it is fully automated.
And there is a dashboard that an admin or a person who is enabled for that person.
Absolutely.
To look at who has what consents in place and so on. So it's very easy to comply. Is that in place?
Absolutely. So we've got a dashboard in place. You can see the preference centers. You can see what data sources that are connected. So this gives you a very nice executive view of
a 360-degree view here as well.
Correct.
So not just for the data,
Correct.
but also for the consent.
Exactly. What are the opt-ins? What are the opt-outs? All of that is logged as well to ensure that there is complete visibility on consent for a user.
Thank you, Aman and Ankur.
So I know we are almost out of time.
Yes.
So I think we'll hand it back to you, Sandeep, to summarize and take us forward.
Thank you, Pankul. So it was a great discussion, Pankul and Amandeep, and a wonderful demo that you showcased to us as well. So Terralogic has now partnered with Lightbeam, and we are offering it as a service to our customers. We would like our customers to understand how the offerings would make their compliances, right? At least from a data discovery as well as consent management and the privacy ops relevant for their organization, right? We're going to start engaging our customers, right? Talking to them at least at the data discovery level to start off with, and take them through the journey of privacy operations, right? Which is our immediate goal for our customers, right? And I'm sure association with Lightning will take us a long way in engaging with our customers as well. So thank you, both of you, to come to our office, and it was a wonderful conversation. We hope to continue to engage with you in the near future as well.
Certainly.
We are also very excited to partner with Terralogic, and we look forward to serving our customers jointly with yourselves and help them in their security and privacy journey in general, not just for the DPDP Act, but also to improve the security and privacy posture that these organizations have. Because that in itself is crucial to have customer trust and also, so it's not just compliance, right? It's also to work effectively with customers.
Sure. Now, before I hand over to Madhuri, Madhuri, can you hear us as well?
Yes, I can hear.
We would like to take any questions that you have raised on the chat. Are there any questions?
Yeah, just hand it over to Madhuri, and then just a second, Madhuri.
Very quickly, we would like to understand this question.
Yeah.
Okay, I think there are. I'm just going to talk about it, Madhuri. I can take over the questions, no problem. Okay. There is one question from Hemant. As Lightbeam detected some information on risk, how are we going to implement controls like PCI DSS? Are we providing any guidelines over there? So maybe I can take this question.
Sure.
So Hemant, PCI DSS is, so that's a great question, by the way. So PCI DSS is certainly regulation for the financial industry. And as Prankul was talking about, right? So if you look at the data that Lightbeam is essentially detecting, I just showed you the example of credit card data, but we've got a whole bunch of attributes that are detected as part of the whole PCI regulation in some sense, or PCI compliance in some sense, right? What we do when we are looking at a certain regulation, so we're not just giving the tool away and telling you, okay, no, you start to become compliant by yourself. This is where the partnership of Terralogic and Lightbeam comes in. So we don't just hand off the tool over to you. We look at what are the different aspects of complying with a PCI regulation. Yes, Lightbeam is coming in and giving you, enabling you from a technology standpoint to help you discover all of these attributes which are relevant from a PCI standpoint and ensure that you have all the security controls in check in place. But it is more of a consultancy that we need to provide to customers who are looking to become PCI DSS compliant. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. We have another question as well.
The second question is it a SaaS-based? Rahul, you want to take that?
Yeah, so I mean, yes and no. So basically what we do is the way Lightbeam is enabled is we do have an API level connect, but we have a microservices based architecture. So we are always connecting directly into the customer ecosystem so that we have the zero trust architecture enabled, that no data is to flow out of the customer ecosystem. So it's more of, you can call it SaaS, but it's more of a private SaaS. So it's somewhere in the middle, but just keeping into account that data security and zero trust is at the baseline of the Lightbeam solution.
Also, just to add to what Prankul said, right? So Hemant, think about this. It's completely up to the customer.
Yeah.
If the customer wants to deploy this within their private cloud, absolutely. We deploy it within their VPC, whether you want to do it within AWS, Azure, Google. We deploy a Kubernetes cluster underneath, as you mentioned, we have a Kubernetes app. You can also deploy this within your on-premises environment. Or if the customer is looking at a complete SaaS-based solution, we can do that as well. So it's completely dependent on how the customer wants it. Most cases we've seen they want it either on-premises or they want it within their VPC for PCI DSS compliance, for example. Sometimes you want to have this within your data centers as well. So it's completely up to the customer. We're agnostic. And last, so we'll certainly share out some technical docs related to this. Happy to do that.
Thank you. So I believe we have addressed all the questions as well. I would like to hand it over to Madhuri for concluding the webinar.
Yeah. So thank you, Prankul and Amandeep, for answering the queries. So yeah, so this was such an insightful webinar. Thank you so much. So before we wrap up, I would like to thank our panelists, Sandeep, Prankul, and Amandeep, and all of the folks who joined today. Thank you so much. So for more DPDPA updates, please follow lightbeam.ai in Terralogic. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you, folks. Thanks, everyone.